Alright, we ready for the Star Wars episode? Hi, it's Robert Macfarlane here, and today we're going to take a look at how Star Wars makes you love robots. I think most of us have probably heard of the term the Uncanny Valley. So just in case you don't know what the Uncanny Valley means, it is essentially a hypothesized relationship or a graph which shows how much we emotionally respond to something that looks more and more like a human. And the valley part of the saying is when that emotional response suddenly dips and becomes a negative response. We rebuke it. We find it eerie and unnerving.
Impossible. The probability of that is 10,003 to 1.
Which also brings me to an interesting fact about the name Uncanny Valley. This was actually a paper that was brought out in the 70s and was incorrectly translated to uncanny, when really the original name actually was translated to Eerie Valley. It doesn't have necessarily the same ring to it, but that is actually closer to what we really feel when we're looking at robots and CG and various content that makes us feel creeped out.
Hello? No, thank you.
I can guarantee you that at some point in your life, whether you were conscious of it or not, you were creeped out by one of these characters that crossed past the peak of the Uncanny Valley graph into the Valley of Doom itself. Now, films such as I think it was The Midnight Express. Tom Hanks' Christmas movie. The Polar Express. Films such as The Polar Express. Now, don't get me wrong, I love me some Tom Hanks. He's brilliant. However, when characters just look and feel as dead as this, you can't help but think that maybe the filmmakers just didn't analyze quite enough where the Uncanny Valley sat for their content, for their characters. Now, Pixar worked this out very early on. They actually did a short film before Toy Story. It was actually a precursor to the Toy Story story. They actually found that the baby, Andy, was the least favoured character out of any in the short film. In fact, people said they hated the child. They asked the same questions about the toy characters, and because of the toy characters having a resemblance but not being too close to that of humans, people seem to really connect to them and their journey in the films. And this is actually what made Pixar make the decision. The rule that they stand by is they never ever do photorealistic film.
What do you mean? You designed it.
I never look back, darling. It distracts from the now.
Now, this is not to say that it's not been tried. Enter Square Enix with Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within.
Our ideas are unpopular, Aki.
This huge, expensive, and to some degree interesting take on a super or hyper realistic film made entirely in CG was a big step forward for CG at the time. However, again, people felt creeped out. They felt pushed away. They weren't able to connect to the characters and their journey. Now, I would probably say that there's some story elements and scripting elements and other things that probably could have helped that film along a little bit.
Doctor, we're so close to proving
But we
it.
still need this part and this one here.
Exactly.
Now, Star Wars didn't necessarily always get this right. In the original films, where there wasn't the option to create characters in full CG models, they had to use puppets. Now, obviously, the limitation with puppets was that they couldn't move around as freely as the actors and or CG models that we see today. So, when we met Yoda originally, his movements were very Whereas in later films, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when we met Yoda, but as a CG character.
Fear is the path to the dark side.
Strangely enough, and probably to the surprise of George Lucas himself, he was met with a lot of pushback. People missed the Yoda of old. Now, Yoda doesn't necessarily look human.
Found someone you have, I would say.
But I think there are other elements at play here, and I think they all culminate in our ability to humanize and empathize with the characters that we see on screen. The robots in Star Wars are, in my opinion, bar none, the most loved robotic characters in all of cinematic history. From C-3PO, R2-D2 to L3-37 to BB-8, all of the other robots seem to not only grab our attention, but also completely endear us to their own journeys.
How did we get into this mess?
And so, just like Pixar, Star Wars never chose to make lifelike robots. They chose to ensure that the robots were easily identifiable.
I beg your pardon, but what do you mean, naked?
They never felt like they were trying to make them humans. They were their own creatures, and this is also why I believe we can connect to Yoda and his plight, his journey. He's not trying to be a human, he is an alien, but he has a moral code that we empathize with as an audience.
That's fine, or I will help you not.
So why would we reject a character or robot that's trying to be more human, yet we are able to connect and fall in love with aliens and robots from Star Wars in a much deeper and meaningful way? It's going to require some research. We have an empathy circuit in our brains. Sounds crazy, but it's true.
You are doomed.
The empathy circuit was actually discovered when scientists were researching patients who were suffering from a particular type of dementia called FTD, or a type of frontal lobe dementia. This is when they actually found that patients were unable to connect to others. They were unable to emotionally connect. And these areas of the brain, this frontal lobe area of the brain, was completely switched off in MRI scans. So that's when they realized that these patients that suffer from a disconnection or an inability to see from another person's perspective, and this part of their brain which was no longer working. So what does this mean for Star Wars and robots? So within the empathy circuit are things called mirror neurons, and these do exactly what they say on the tin. They actually mirror what we are seeing, or whatever our sensory input is of that person. We can hear someone cry, we can hear someone laugh, we can see them in pain, and we can actually feel some of what they're feeling. With these mirror neurons, when we look at these robots and these particular characters on screen, as long as they don't creep us out because they're eerily close to what a human looks like, we then divert to looking for human behaviors. And these behaviors are what we're looking for to associate particular types of personality with that character. And as soon as we see that, we're able to engage our mirror neurons again. Now, if we look back at when Star Wars initially came out in the 70s, there were a slew of movies that were coming out showing robots as very precise, thinking doers.
Presenting His Eminence, our imperious leader.
So George Lucas chose to do the exact opposite with the robots. Instead of trying to make the robots look more human, like Terminator, make them precise and very rigid, like Terminator, He chose to make sure that they had human attributes. Now, I don't necessarily mean that they can cry. However, we can perceive if these robots are sad.
Goodness gracious me.
Or scared.
Although there's a problem on the horizon. There's no horizon.
Fearful for their lives.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
But he went further than that. He made sure that these robots also made mistakes. They were clumsy. They had fights and disagreements like humans.
I've just about had enough of you.
Even the more dangerous robots in the Star Wars galaxy show clumsiness and sarcasm and humor.
That wasn't much of a rescue.
You're welcome.
Now, I touched on something just then that I think probably you guys might be going, well, what does that mean? I said a thinking doer. In psychology, generally humans are seen as both emotional doers and thinking doers. Now, what this means is that we can both use logic and emotion to come up with a decision about an action. And what this generally means is that we will have a moral compass that will help decide roughly what our action will be, and then we have a thought process, a thinking, a logic process to decide which of those should be the best action to take. Whereas we do get scared by machines because they are ultimately a thinking doer. And this is what I think is brilliant about Alex Garland's Ex Machina movie, where he actually fools us and the character in the film. Oh, spoiler alert, go watch Ex Machina if you haven't. It is brilliant. But his character, his robot in Ex Machina, fools us into thinking it is a thinking doer as well as a feeling doer.
Are you attracted to me? You give me indications that you are.
I do?
Yes.
So when we see that this robot has fear and is scared for its life, we think we understand it, so we place a set of values on it, and then in brilliant story fashion is twisted on us, and we recognize that this robot is actually still a thinking doer, unable to empathize with the humans around it. So when it does cause harm and even murders one of the humans, it doesn't rationalize that with emotions. It rationalizes it with thinking. It has a particular goal to be free. And I believe this was beautifully manifested in the moment that the robot itself lays skin over its body for the first time. When it finds freedom, it hides itself at the same time so it can blend in with the rest of humanity. So what creeps us out here is, even though the moment we see the robot in its own skin, fully covered in skin, it looks 100% real, we are still creeped out by the robot because we understand this underlying psychological process to its decision making and how it comes up with its actions. On to the next point. So another element that I think really just pushes the Star Wars robots to a whole new level was really brought to light in Star Wars: A Solo Movie, with the robot in there actually having a history of evolving itself.
Excuse me. Get your presumptuous ass out of my seat.
It's also touched on a few times throughout the other films, where we see C-3PO tussling with the idea of losing all its memories and experiences in favor of achieving a particular goal.
What are you doing there, 3PO?
Taking one last look, sir, at my friends.
However, what I do believe is a huge reason why we love these robots is they can grow just like the characters that we're watching, who are our leads, our Luke Skywalker, our Princess Leia, our Rey? I think it's just Rey. Rey and Finn? Rey and Finn. Brilliant characters that can also grow because they are human. So by enabling the robots to also evolve, they again take one step away from being robots within our subconscious.
Droid! We are sentient! I'm gonna flip your switch! Good luck finding it!
However, Star Wars taking this particular route of thought about the growth of robots actually being to the betterment of all of the characters within the Star Wars universe is actually a really refreshing way of looking at it, and I think they could explore it some more.
I haven't the faintest idea why I agreed to this.
I believe that Star Wars has achieved what no other franchise, no other film or TV series has been able to achieve truly. And that is enabling us to empathize and fall in love with the characters that are portrayed by robots in its universe. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to check out the links below and come back every Monday and Thursday for more episodes.